Okay, everybody, welcome to Lunch and Learn. In previous presentations in our criminal justice reform series, we've heard about the restorative justice process and the Criminal Justice Collaborative Council that we have here in Washtenaw County, and how such initiatives can positively affect outcomes of those who enter the court system on state and local levels. Today's presentation, Stopping the Prison Pipeline, the Importance of Youth Justice Advocacy, focuses on the experience of youth in the courts. Our scheduled presenter, Mary King, was called away on family business, and we are fortunate to have as our speaker today, Husain Haidri, currently Community Outreach and Engagement Manager at the Michigan Council for Youth Justice. But first, if you're new here, a bit about us. The League of Women Voters is a non-profit voter education organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. We believe that voting is a fundamental citizen right that must be guaranteed. While the League does not support parties or candidates, we do take position on issues that we have studied. Our programs will not necessarily represent these positions, but provide forums to increase understanding of public policy concerns. The phrase school to prison pipeline describes the way strict discipline in the form of suspensions and expulsions for simple infractions falls disproportionately on Black and Brown students and pushes them out of school and into the growing system of mass incarceration. A recent study from Harvard, Boston University, and the University of Colorado confirms this phenomenon. As the researchers wrote in Education Next, our findings show that early censure of school misbehavior causes increases in adult crime, that there is, in fact, a school to prison pipeline. Any effort to maintain safe and orderly school climates must take into account the clear and negative consequences of exclusionary discipline practices for young students, and especially young students of color, which last well into adulthood. The researchers also stated, misbehaving peers can have strong negative impacts on other students in the classroom, and all students need a safe, predictable environment to learn. But our findings show that the school to prison pipeline is real and poses a substantial risk for students in strict school environments. As the outcomes for such things are such as a higher likelihood of adult incarceration, also pose substantial problems for society as a whole. So we, on our program today, we're going to start discussing these issues, and let's talk about the schools. We can all recognize that all students need a safe environment to thrive, but what can be done to ensure that students arrive in the classroom ready to learn, then misbehave? And when misbehavior occurs, what can be done to mitigate its effect, not only on others in the classroom, but on the student exhibiting the behavior? The Michigan Council for Youth Justice is the relatively new name for the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency. Its mission addresses these questions. For 60 years, this organization has worked within communities on crime prevention strategies, promoting fair and equitable access to justice, expanding community-based alternatives to incarceration, and improving outcomes through safe and effective treatment. This multi-pronged approach aims to stop the school to prison pipeline. Our speaker, Husain Haidri, joined MCYJ in February 2021 as their Community Outreach and Engagement Manager. Previously, he volunteered in the organization's successful Raise the Age campaign to keep those under 18 out of the court system, the adult court system. He currently works on programs such as Debt-Free Justice, which aims to standardize court fees and fines across the state, as well as encouraging those who have been in the youth justice system to share their stories in an effort to make their experiences more visible. He is also pursuing a Master's of Business Administration at Wayne State with the intent to one day attend law school. Husain is also very politically and civically engaged and currently serves as a Canton Township Commissioner. Before MCYJ, Husain worked at Voters Not Politician and the ACLU, while also managing and staffing several political campaigns. Mr. Haidri, welcome.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you guys so much for having me here to talk about a very important issue and an issue that's pretty near and dear to my heart. And as I get into that, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so that you all can see the presentation. Here we go. Okay, so I just want to start by saying that one of the things that we think about a lot at the Michigan Center for Youth Justice is the way that we talk about our audience, the way that we talk about our supporters. And we're very, very intentional with the way that we describe people that think about youth justice and are thoughtful about what kinds of solutions we need to implement in our state. And so I tend to refer to our volunteers as youth justice advocates, because you're not a volunteer for MCYJ. That's not your identity. Your identity is going to be being an advocate for youth justice in the state of Michigan, because so much work needs to be done. Now, Shelley got a little bit into our mission and vision and the history of our organization, but I'm just going to throw it up on the screen for everyone to be able to see. I'm just going to highlight a few things. Our vision is a fair and effective justice system for Michigan's children, youth, and young adults. And what that means is that at every point in the process that a kid is involved in the justice system or with someone that can provide them care to help them, rectify some of the wrongs that they've committed in their life or mistakes that they've made. We want to make sure that every point in that process is fair and it leads to an effective outcome for promoting justice in our state and in our country. I also want to mention that there's a couple of buzzwords here on the slide: trauma-informed, racially equitable, socioeconomically and culturally responsive. These are more than just platitudes and buzzwords. These are the values that drive our organization's work. We need to make sure that we're addressing some of the racial inequities in our justice system. The data show that different socioeconomic classes in our state are treated very differently by the youth legal system. That is counter to our fair and effective justice system that we're working toward. So understanding and responding to those socioeconomic inequities, those racial inequities, is at the core of our work. Also, a part of that is introducing community-based solutions, knowing that we can implement outcomes on the state level, but at the end of the day, communities are going to be the ones that have to accept their youth and really take care of them. So that is the work that MCYJ does. A little bit about our history. It was the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency, as Shelley mentioned, was founded in 1956 in response to the Jackson prison riots. There were inhumane living conditions. There was a lot of attention paid to that issue and a lot of energy devoted to that issue. And so the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency, really took that opportunity to do a significant amount of work. And over our 60 years of advocacy, we've accomplished a lot of things for youth. Prison overcrowding projects. We're working on expanding youth diversion programs, preventing violence by and against children. These are the issues that really animated our work. I would say that our signature achievement was the Raise the Age campaign, which raised the age of considering youth as adults in the justice system from 17 to 18, and that went into effect today. And that has had an incredible impact on people's lives, and it's going to. Kids that are 17 years old aren't considered adults in any other setting, and they were considered adults in the court setting until just this year. And so we believe that that's going to have far-reaching positive consequences on our youth legal system, but that's not where the work ends. And so considering that, there's so many other changes that need to be made, and there's no other organization in the entire state that is youth justice focused. The Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency went through a strategic rebrand, and we became the Michigan Center for Youth Justice in 2020. And that really is to help us realign with our mission, our core mission of youth justice reform. And so this is a little bit about who we are. Jason Smith, whose headshot you see here, is the executive director. Heidi Frankenhauser is our deputy director. Gabrielle Dresner is our policy associate. And I'm going to pause here and say that I'm going to talk a lot about youth justice as an issue, a lot about, the policy problems and the data, but I am not the expert on, our issues. Gabby is the one that does all the research and really helps put together a lot of this information in a way that we can understand and in a way that we can advocate for solutions. So I'll answer your questions to the best of my ability, but when there's questions that I can't answer, it's going to go back to Gabby, and she's really going to have to help you out there. But I, will do my best to answer all of your questions and get the answers that I don't have. Afaf is our communications and development coordinator. She does a lot of work to help us with volunteers, help us with our newsletters, social media, and so many other things. David Rosen is our director of development. I'll mention here that MCYJ is a heavily grant-funded organization, and David helps make all that possible. And then there is little old me. I'm the outreach and engagement manager, as Shelley mentioned. I am responsible for helping the Michigan Center for Youth Justice develop relationships across the state with different organizations that have some stake in a fair and effective youth justice system. But what that also means is that I get to speak to organizations like the League of Women Voters and really spread the word. But what I'll say is that the most important part of my job is changing the narrative about youth justice. I ask everywhere that I go, I like to ask people, like, what do you know about youth justice? And the people, that the vast majority of people say that they don't know much at all. And those that are, brave enough to share something say, well, we know about juvie, right? Which is like, residential or detention facilities for youth. But that is not, that's a small part of our system. It's a significant part of our system, and it has far-reaching consequences. But there's so much more that has to do with youth. Even that term juvie carries certain connotations. And so my job, the biggest part of my job, is changing the narrative about youth justice so that people can know, what challenges there are and what solutions there are to those challenges. And that's what this presentation is going to be about today. And before I get into that, I also want to talk about our philosophy for the juvenile justice system, for the youth legal system. One of the core values that we believe in, and this is born out by the science and the research, is that youth are developmentally different from adults. And the brain is not fully developed until you're in your mid-20s. And what that means is the decision-making process is very different. Reacting to various stimuli in the environment, making mistakes in high pressure situations, failure to judge a situation appropriately. These are all the result of being developmentally different from adults, and having less of a biological ability to make decisions at the best level. And this isn't a recent development. This is part of a long-standing belief in the legal system that youth should be treated differently. And the science has borne that out. And so that is one of the core assumptions that we make in our work. The other principle that I want to talk about is the weighing of public safety against the best interests of the youth. Public safety is a priority when making any decisions, but it has to be balanced against what is best for the youth. One of the challenges here is that communities want to be safe, but as I'll talk about in the presentation, some of those measures they take for safety can come at the expense of the youth's mental health or the ability of the youth to reform whatever mistake that they've made. And so we're advocating for that balance in that scenario. The last thing I'm going to mention here is that we advocate for a lot of age-appropriate services, and that means age-appropriate services and then situation-appropriate services. So, a lot of these situations come during, incidents of mental health problems or substance abuse. We want to, make sure that in every scenario we're treating people with respect to their particular issue, rather than trying to paint with a broad brush. And there's obvious challenges there, like budgetary challenges, staffing challenges. Like we can't, one of the things we hear is like, we can't have one person dealing with every single kid because we don't have enough staff for that. But the fact of the matter is that if the best interests of the youth are going to be at heart, we need to be willing to front the resources for that. And so that's part of what MCYJ advocates for. And one other thing that I want to mention here. So you'll notice that I don't like to use the term juvenile or juvenile delinquent offender, this, super predator term that we find in academia and, otherwise. Language matters. And, part of being a youth justice advocate and part of being an advocate for justice in general is recognizing the way that we talk about justice, to one another and to, to kids in particular. A 14-year-old child is not criminal, right? A 14-year-old child is someone that has made a mistake and, has to see the consequences of that and learn from that. But they're not juvenile delinquents or offenders or super predators. These are kids, right? These are justice impacted young people. These are youth. These are the terms that we need to be using because in order for us to make the biggest changes for, for the best interest of the youth, we have to make sure that we're talking about youth as youth. We need to take away the stigma that comes with being associated with the justice system. So I'll encourage all of you to do the same thing. And here I want to draw the line between what we do versus what we don't do. So the Michigan Center for Youth Justice does not work with individual youth on their legal cases. There are organizations that do that. And so when someone reaches out to us and asks for that kind of support, we refer them to those organizations. But we work at the structural change level. We're advocating for change in the state legislature. We're working with counties and juvenile courts to encourage them to change their policies and change their ways of funding, to change particular aspects of the justice system that can victimize minority youth disproportionately. That's the kind of work that we do. We do research on how different policies affect people, and then we publish reports on those policies. So that's the work that we do, and you can find all of this information on our website, which will be shared out to you after the presentation. I want to talk a little bit about Michigan's youth justice system specifically. So one of the things that it's not unique to Michigan, but one of the things that makes Michigan's youth legal system a little more challenging is the fact that it's decentralized. Every single one of the 83 counties in the state of Michigan has its own youth legal system. And so that means that Washtenaw County does its own thing, Wayne County does its own thing, and Grand Traverse County does its own thing, and there is not necessarily collaboration between these counties. There's counties that do sometimes work together, that do share resources, but they are not required to do so. And the counties that are working independently often face challenges because of that, because they're recreating the wheel on a lot of the resources that they're creating. What this also leads to is what at the Michigan Center for Youth Justice we like to call justice by geography. If you live in Canton, Michigan, which is kind of at the border of Wayne County and Washtenaw County, that's where I grew up, you're going through the Wayne County youth legal system. But if you grew up not too far away in Ypsilanti, Michigan, you're going through the Washtenaw County youth legal system. And so that, it's not as though I am very different growing up in Canton, Michigan than a youth in Ypsilanti, Michigan. But it's the fact that our system is so decentralized that we would have we can have entirely different outcomes because our state hasn't centralized a lot of the standards and a lot of the resources. The second thing I want to mention here is that while we have an upper age limit now, the Raise the Age campaign changed the upper age limit from 17 to 18. We don't have a lower age limit. So that means kids that are very, very young can be a part of, can be considered for some of these offenses. And, we see cases where there's, 12, 14-year-old kid, having to come into court, and that is not an experience that, anyone should have. Part of our partnerships is we're working with the Michigan Medicine's pediatric program. And I work with these residents every month. And, I hear them talking about how youth are different. And one of the residents mentioned to me a few weeks ago the impact that shackling can have on youth. Just the Just the experience of having, chains on you as a kid that restrict your movement. That's a traumatic experience. And having that experience at a really young age can be very, very detrimental to mental health outcomes later on in life, to academic outcomes later on in life, to job, to employment outcomes later on in life. And so this is also a really vital, it's a really critical project that we're working on. But yeah. Okay, so at this point, I want to shift the structure of this presentation to a problem and solution structure. So this is, what I would like here is to talk about all of the challenges, or many of the challenges in our youth justice system. But I also want to talk about solutions, because those are, equally important. I don't want anyone walking out of this presentation or finishing this, finish watching this video thinking like, oh, it's hopeless, right? Because there is a lot of hope. We can't solve all of the problems in our youth legal system, but we can start to address a lot of them. And your role as an advocate for youth justice will go a long way in addressing these problems. And I hope to demonstrate that in the next couple of slides. The first problem I want to talk about is that there's no real-time accounting for who is in the system. The state and the counties, the state of Michigan and the individual counties are spending a combined total of at least $400 million every year on youth justice. And despite this, no one in the state knows how many youth are being processed in the courts or their demographics, if they receive community-based programs or confinement, the types of programming they receive, or the results. And I'll mention this as Shelley mentioned that I'm getting my Master of Business Administration right now at Wayne State. One of the principles that we learn in business is if you're going to invest in a project, if you're going to invest in a business, you better find a way to measure the success of that investment. You have to be able to understand where that money is going and how it's being used. And so as taxpayers, we have a responsibility to find out where that money is going. And the counties and the state have a responsibility to show us. But right now, there is no centralized way of collecting that data. The majority of counties are reporting some of that data to the state court administrator's office, but not all do. And some of them don't report any at all. And so that's a pretty significant challenge. And so one of the solutions that we present to that is that one of the things that advocates can do is raise awareness that Michigan doesn't have this data collection framework. We need to implement a statewide data collection system to capture and report demographics and outcome information. There's simply no other way. Like I said, a $400 million investment with no measurement, that's ludicrous, and it should be outrageous to every taxpayer in our state. But I also want to mention that there are racial inequities, which we'll get to in a moment, that play a large role here. And we need to impose, a level of urgency on these legislators to say, like, we need to know what is happening in the system. We have an idea of what kinds of racial inequities and what kinds of challenges, kids are going through on the state level, but we can't speak with a lot of clarity and a lot of confidence on exactly what those are until we have data collection. And so one thing advocates can do is reach out to their legislators, reach out to their juvenile court, reach out to their county commission, and get that information. Okay. Another one of the problems that that we face in our state is that over 90% of youth arrests in Michigan are for nonviolent offenses. And of course, there's a disproportionate impact of on youth of color. What the research shows is that most kids who've committed an offense will just grow out of it. If we did nothing at all, the vast majority of kids will learn from their mistakes and move on. And so when we have this youth legal response, especially when it's harsh and punitive, what we can do is actually cause more harm than good, right? We can end up labeling a kid as an offender or as a juvenile delinquent, and that'll lead to what the research shows is a self-fulfilling prophecy, where some of these kids are like, well, I am a bad kid, and I bad kids do what bad kids do, and so what we can do is actually cause some of these issues to be exacerbated. And so one of the solutions that we provide to that is, let's see, there we go, that we can increase investment and reinvestment in anti-racist trauma-informed prevention strategies before we get to the court involvement. And this is one thing I'll mention here is like the on-ramps into the youth justice system. We can talk about how kids get out of the youth legal system. Well, there's three ways that they end up in the youth legal system: police, schools, and parents, right? And police, schools, and parents. This is parents reporting their kids or parents seeking mental health treatment for their kids, recognizing that the counties are in a lot of communities the primary provider of mental health services for kids. Schools, referring kids to the youth legal system, or police getting involved. We need to increase investment in the anti-racist trauma-informed prevention strategies that help kids before they get to court. So when the police or when the school and the parents recognize that there's a problem, they're able to step in and take steps that avoid court involvement later on, that youth legal response that I mentioned later on, in order to give kids the opportunity to grow out of it and learn from their mistake before they have to pay exorbitant amounts of money or have to get into detention facilities. The other thing I want to talk about is status offenses. So status offenses, these are behaviors that are not legal for adults, or that are legal, they're not illegal for adults, excuse me, but they are for young people. And the reason we have these is because we want to encourage a certain level of discipline on youth and keep them away from certain things like, underage drinking or skipping school. But this is what the result of that is. 11% of youth legal cases are for status offenses. And what's really interesting is that girls are overrepresented in status offenses. And so this is where, girls enter the youth legal system. But let me explain this a little bit. So a kid comes into the system because they were skipping school or it's something they weren't supposed to be doing, right? And they, get off with probation. They come off probation, they sign an agreement and they're off. And that prevents them from going into detention. But that probation comes with a long list of conditions, like they got to show up on time, they got to be doing their homework, they got to be, filling out certain reports and other things, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on, and these are very long lists. But if they violate a single one of those conditions of their probation, the court can lock them up. And so, a small mistake like skipping school, or something that you're not supposed to be doing, but something that doesn't deserve, that doesn't mean you deserve getting locked up. A kid will end up being locked up for a significant period of time. And we'll talk about, what that out of home placement or detention can actually end up costing financially. And that's not even to mention the mental health consequences it can have later on in the future. And so, that's the story of how a status offense can lead to confinement. But one of the other problems I want to mention here is that LGBTQ youth are overrepresented in the youth legal system as a result of status offenses and lower level offenses. Approximately 20% of youth in the youth legal system or in youth legal facilities identify as LGBTQ, right? And that's 3 times the estimated number of youth in the US. They are more likely to be arrested, held in detention. They're more likely to experience sexual victimization, and so many other challenges that they face. They're already at risk in our society because of the, of the stigma associated with their identity, but also, when they're in these facilities or when they're going through the youth legal system, they're overrepresented, and then they face additional challenges on top of that. And so we have proposed a different solution to these problems. One of the things that we can do is reduce the number of youth entering the youth legal system as a result of school-based arrests, right? School resource officers, who are basically just police officers in schools, are a big part of this. And there's schools in our community who are in our state who have school resource officers, but they don't have social workers, right? Or they have more social worker, or they have more school resource officers than social workers. Mary King, who was supposed to do this presentation earlier, unfortunately she had a conflict, but she talks about how there was a school in New York that had 6 school resource officers and not a single social worker. That really shows where the priorities are in that school district. But understanding from a youth justice perspective, how we allocate our resources, is really important to understanding how what those outcomes are going to be. Because if we have more school resource officers, which we've talked about are on-ramps to the youth legal system, and we have less social workers who are off-ramps to the youth legal system, we are much more likely to have youth entering the legal system than otherwise. And that is not an outcome that we should find desirable. So one of the other things that we want to talk about is reducing confinement of youth for status offenses. And here's where your role as advocates can come in as well. We want to build support for the passage of legislation to restrict juvenile court's ability to confine youth, even for violations of probation. I mentioned before that the probation comes with a long list of conditions, and a lot of these kids end up on probation for nonviolent offenses, non-serious or non-serious offenses, in the sense that they're not offenses that will lead to providing or presenting a greater risk to society later on. We want to build public support for legislation that's going to restrict some of that ability to detain kids. And this is where you can also lean on your legislators and provide that kind of pressure. I also want to talk about here, one of the bigger challenges that we face in our state. It's equal access to justice. For kids that weren't able to be diverted, or even just get access for kids that want to be diverted or want access to diversion, they need adequate legal representation. And the Supreme Court of the United States has said that kids need to have good legal representation, and they deserve it. But what we find is that kids waive their right to counsel pretty often, and they don't make good decisions. And this leads to them sinking even deeper into the system. And Michigan in particular is one of the worst states in the nation for a kid, to be a kid in the legal system. You'll see we're ranked 44th in the nation, and attorney fees play a big role in the lack of equal access to justice. So the solution is to provide, or is to improve quality juvenile defense for youth that can't afford it. The National Juvenile Defender Center, at the request of the Michigan Supreme Court, completed a report last year and made recommendations about the youth legal system. And one of the big ones was that we need to improve access to representation for youth. This is, as neighbors and as friends of youth, as former youth, I like to consider myself a youth still. This is a big issue for me, because knowing that a kid can go through the legal system, which is already very, very challenging for even an adult, and have to go through that without adequate legal representation, when our goal is to provide kids the opportunity to lead productive lives in the future, that is just outrageous. And this is where our role as advocates comes in. The way that Michigan law is set up is that confinement has declined to some extent, but it's still among the highest. Michigan is still among the highest in the nation for youth confinement, and in our state in particular, racial disparities are pretty staggering. And African American youth are 5 times as likely as white youth to be incarcerated, and youth that have been incarcerated are likely to be rearrested for a felony offense within 2 years of their release. And this goes back to what I was talking about with kids are pretty likely to grow out of the mistakes that they make initially if we do nothing at all. This youth legal response often leads to future issues. And the research is pretty robust here. It says that, you know, kids that feel like they've been labeled as bad kids will go on to act that way because that's the identity that they've been given. And so the solution, is that community-based programs are really important. They've proven time and time again to be more effective than confinement, at improving problem behavior, even like family relationships. A community-based solution that gives parents the opportunity to address some of the challenges and repair some of their relationships. These go a long way, and they cost far less. They cost far, far less than detention and confinement. So we need to expand these community-based services and decarceration strategies. There's grants and so many projects and initiatives that help people in their communities, and find out if your community has this, has these resources, and advocate for them if your community doesn't. And if your community does, share those out with your community. Make sure that everyone is able to have access to them. But I also want to talk about how youth, the different ways that youth are being harmed in these facilities. The use of restraints has caused a lot of injuries in our state. One very serious example is last year, Cornelius Fredericks he's a young boy, and he was improperly restrained. And as a result of that, he was killed. And this led to a very public outcry. Part of our work now is working with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services on residential reforms that we're hoping to introduce and avoid some of these situations from happening again. But also, aside from all of that, there's other forms of harm that can happen during confinement, like solitary confinement, isolation. These have mental health consequences. More than half of all suicides in juvenile facilities occurred while young people were held in isolation. This is not the outcome that we're looking for in our youth legal system, and we need to draw attention to this. And so, one of the solutions to that is improving transparency, accountability, and oversight of youth detention centers and residential facilities. We should never be using physical restraints and solitary confinement or seclusion for confined youth. That is not a viable solution. It might be an easier solution for those that are responsible for those facilities, but that is not the right solution. There's none of the research that's been done on this shows that is an effective solution at preventing whatever situation that youth are going through. But we also need to create an oversight committee that's able to independently evaluate these different policies in different situations, and provide their opinion in a way that is independent and considers all the sides, but is still putting the best interest of the youth forward. And here I want to mention some data about your county in particular, Washtenaw County in particular. So Black youth comprise about 17% of the population, but in terms of arrests, they're far higher. And then in detention placements, it's even closer. It's almost 50%, almost half of detention placements in Washtenaw County are Black youth, right? And long-term confinement, they're a little bit overrepresented as well. And so this is something that this is also something that's outrageous. One of the things that we hear a lot is that we want a youth legal system that is colorblind, and that's okay, and that's a good sentiment, that we want a legal system that does not see race. But the fact of the matter is that if our legal system does not see race, instead of destroying those racial disparities, what it does is it entrenches those racial disparities. Understanding that those three on-ramps I was talking about, schools, police, and parents, some of the on-ramps in our youth legal system have disproportionately referred youth of color to the youth legal system. And so if the youth legal system is all of a sudden colorblind and it's not anti-racist, what happens is that those initial disparities become entrenched and we have more disproportionate outcomes for youth of color. When instead what we should be doing is proposing solutions that are racially conscious and based in the reality of how those on-ramps are affecting youth of color. And then the final problem one of the final problems that I want to talk about is, the cost of being a youth in the youth legal system. Michigan law permits courts to charge youth in the youth legal system with a variety of mandatory and discretionary fines and fees. And this is the project that we're working on the most right now. This is our focus. So in addition to charging for attorneys, the state requires counties to charge families for the cost of detention and residential placements. But it allows courts to waive that if that's how the court decides to operate. Now, Washtenaw County isn't charging, and Wayne County stopped about a year ago. And other counties have taken steps to do that. The county that we've worked in, most recently is Macomb County, where Macomb County has worked on this. We just published a report, which you can get access to on our website. And for those that are that are on the League of Women Voters email list, you guys will get access to this as well. But in Macomb County, we interviewed 15 families, and we found out that they had an average of $80,000 in debt. And the $80,000, that's a pretty incredible number. But I want to mention, like, some of these fines and fees are pretty incredible. Like, there's a bizarre case of a family in which the youth had stolen the family's car, and the family is now paying restitution to the court for the car that was stolen by the member of the family, right? And so there's this weird, that's not a situation that's productive for anybody. And the family is now lost twice, right? Now the family is facing significant challenges, and if they can't pay their fines and fees, and they can't get a waiver, and it's a very complex system to get that kind of a waiver, then they're going to carry that debt for a long time, and the court can capture their wages, tax returns, stimulus checks, and it can follow youth forever almost. When you turn 18, that debt doesn't go away. It gets transferred from the family to the youth, him or herself, and that makes it difficult to find a job or get a line of credit, get a mortgage, right, buy a house, and establish good credit. These are challenges that even after a youth has reformed their life and they've stopped being involved with certain groups, and they've taken steps to improve their life, now there's additional barriers from a mistake that they made when they were that young. And so the solution that we're proposing is to eliminate the imposition of discretionary and waivable fines and fees that are burdening our youth in our state. We need to build public support. I talked about changing the narrative. This is one of those things. Counties will talk about that they don't have the money to continue to run their court system without these fines and fees. But the fact of the matter is that we need to build our youth legal system not on a financial basis or a financial justification. We need to be making policies about our youth legal system based in our values and our assumptions about what a just youth justice system looks like. And that means that we shouldn't be charging these, or for what that means for our beliefs is that we shouldn't be charging these fines and fees for youth. And so, post information about this on social media, contact your legislator. One plug I'll throw in right here is on our website. You can, if you find the fines and the debt-free justice page, you can sign a letter that goes to your elected officials, imploring them to take action on these issues. We have bills pending right now in the state legislature that go toward addressing these fines and fees. And so this is where you can step in as a youth justice advocate. But I want to step back here and just talk about our current priorities on a county level and then a state level. So on the county level, in Kalamazoo County, we're working to create an anti-racist juvenile justice framework to help address the causes of the racial disparities that I talked about earlier. How do we build a youth legal system in a county that is racially aware and anti-racist, right? instead of one that's just colorblind, one that addresses the racial injustices in a data-informed way, and so we're working with Kalamazoo County on that. The other project that I want to bring attention to, and I talked about LGBTQ youth, is that we're working with Wayne County to advance justice for youth with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And Wayne County has been pretty supportive of that, but there's challenges that come with that, because at every level that we add a wrinkle, there's more resources required, right? And this is part of the reason that we need to be addressing the rate of confinement for youth. So that's some of the work that we're doing at the county level. At the state level, we have the residential reform project I talked about. We're working with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and then we're also working in the debt-free justice campaign to eliminate those fines and fees on a statewide level, working with the state legislature, and we're working to centralize some aspects of the legal system for youth. And this is a big campaign of not only legislative advocacy, but also public education. Not a lot of people know about how these fines and fees affect youth. I mentioned the doctors that I work with at Michigan Medicine a little bit earlier. One of the doctors was telling me that he had a youth that had significant mental health challenges, and he wouldn't take his medication as prescribed, on the timeline that he was required to do so. And what he cited were financial problems, right? He had been justice involved when he was significantly younger, and because of those challenges that he faced, he now, is facing more significant challenges related to his mental health. And, those mental health challenges are going even further to affect his ability to take care of serious health conditions. And so, these fines and fees have longstanding consequences that are more than just financial. They have to do with the health as well. And I want to mention here, and I'll leave this up on the slide. I don't want to read all of it, but I want to draw attention to the cost of out-of-home placement. Out-of-home placement, usually the data shows between 6 to 9 months, and say it costs $320 a day. I'll do the math for you. That's $57,000 for out-of-home placement for 6 months. $57,000. You could put a kid through college with that. You can buy a brand new Tesla with that. That's a lot of money that kids have in terms of debt. And it's not like they went to college and got a degree and have student loans. This isn't debt that's productive in any way. It's debt that's punitive. It's punitive, and there's no reason for it to continue to set up challenges for youth. The State Court Administrative Office I mentioned before says that $32 million were assessed in fees across 74 counties. 74 counties because not every county reports this data, but the amount collected was only $8 million. So only a quarter of this money of these fines and fees that are being assessed is even collected. Only a quarter, right? And so that begs the question. You'll see in the history of the way that these fines and fees were imposed. You got to ask, like, why is this money why are these fines and fees being assessed in the first place? And what the legislative history will show you is that, in addition to some of, the values-based reasons, and, we need to make the justice system, we need to, impose the importance of the justice system and following the law and, strong on crime rhetoric. We need to do all these things. That was part of the reason that some of these fines and fees were expanded. But the other reasons, and time again, this has happened. One of the other reasons that these fines and fees were expanded so much was financial, right? There were fiscal crises that the state legislature faced time and time again, where they expanded the number of offenses that could be considered for fines and fees, discretionary fines and fees, in order to pay off the debt that was created for others by other services. And a lot of these fines and fees go to retired legislators or funding highway patrol, that kind of thing, right? And so we have to, at this point, we have to reassess, why are these fines and fees being imposed? Is it a justice-related reason, or is it a financial reason? Because if it's not a justice reason, then it has no place in the justice system. Here I want to talk about what that fines and fees breakdown looks like. So $22 million of so I mentioned 32 million here, 22 million of that goes toward residential placement. Then there's probation fees and attorney's fees, around $1.5 million. And the rest are other fees. But I want to, highlight for you how burdensome that residential placement is. A lot of times, like I mentioned before, the county is the biggest provider of mental health services for youth, right? And so you have to think, you have to wonder why that is the case. There's other failings in our system beyond the youth legal system that we're not providing mental health services, but residential placement is the solution for some people, for some families, and for some kids. And to saddle them with incredible amounts of debt, $22 million in debt across 74 counties, that's an incredible amount of money. And then beyond that as well, $1.5 million of attorney's fees. These are supposed to be the individuals that are helping us navigate a very, very complex system. And in turn, kids have to turn around and be $1 million in debt. That's a serious issue. And so the Michigan Center for Youth Justice is working with the state legislature right now. We have 4 bills pending in the Michigan House Judiciary Committee, pending even getting a hearing. And your role as advocates can be to create the urgency for those legislators to address some of these challenges, not only because kids are being treated unfairly, but because the state of Michigan is making an investment on the scale of $400 million without any metric for evaluating the success of of that money. So that's the work that we're doing, and I really, really hope that you all will use your voice to advocate for youth justice in your communities. And after all that information, time for some questions.
Thank you very much. I think my jaw was dropping on some of the things you were saying, and I think, ending on that, what the fines and fees, like I can't even imagine coming out of jail and finding yourself $80,000 in debt. And I can really see how that would be such a, just such a burden. So I want to start with a few questions, and then one of our tech team I think there were some questions in the chat that we'll get to as well. The first one is data collected and are schools held accountable for suspensions and expulsions that contribute to the school to prison pipeline?
So this is one of the challenges, like I mentioned, with the decentralized system, right? The school boards and individual schools are also on in a similar kind of situation, but we have to recognize that we don't have statewide, like I mentioned, we don't have a statewide system of collecting information on any part of the youth legal system, right? And so when it comes to these detention and suspensions and expulsions, I can't cite that data for you either, right? And part of that is my own lack of knowledge, but I can also tell you for a fact that there isn't a single person in the state that can tell you exactly how many kids are going through the youth legal system on a yearly basis, on an annual basis, right? And so those are that's what we're fighting for. And I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer to your question, but it's just that's one of the challenges that we face.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a really important one. I mean, so I'm interested. I know you're going to give us some links to legislation and so forth, your position papers and on legislation. I'm really that is something that our audience can really use, because we write to our elected representatives and interact with them. So the second question is, what is happening to early release? And I'm not sure what early release even is. So
I don't have information on that in particular. What I think that question might be referring to is release as a result of COVID-19. One of the things that is a part of this presentation that I sometimes add in is the extent to which COVID-19 was affecting youth in detention, right? This is incredibly challenging for a number of reasons. I mentioned solitary confinement and isolation lead to bad mental health outcomes for youth. And COVID-19, what were we asking people to do? People that weren't incarcerated were asked to isolate in their homes. How do you isolate kids in detention facilities? Well, you put them in solitary confinement. You can't exactly social distance, in those small rooms. So what ended up happening was that these residential facilities were primed for being super spreaders, right? All these kids were at high risk, and so I don't have updated information on what that early release is looking like now, but that is just for the benefit of everyone else that didn't know about that. That is the challenge that a lot of facilities faced, and they had to be nimble and they had to address some of those situations.
Okay. Another question is, what is the status of making sure returning citizens have valid ID when they are released? Is there a statewide program?
So that's information that would better be, that's a question that would better be directed to an organization that works with, criminal justice, more specifically, where the Michigan Center for Youth Justice is focused on youth in particular. But I would check with the Michigan, I forget what the acronym means. It's called MCYJ. That's an organization that does a lot of great work. Or Nation Outside is an initiative that the Michigan Center for Youth Justice worked on. That's an organization that works with returning citizens that are trying to, get jobs, and it's almost a support system that returning citizens can work with. So those are some really good resources that I can point you to.
What was the second one? It was Nation Outside?
Nation Outside. Nation Outside. It's an organization in the state of Michigan, or an initiative in the state of Michigan that I think they're working on making it more, give it a presence statewide, or nationwide, but it gives returning citizens access to other returning citizens who have gone through similar challenges, and have resources to help them.
And the first one also, I didn't quite catch the name of the.
MCYJ. So I can drop a link for MCYJ. It's the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. They have a lot of really good information on this.
Okay.
If someone wants to put it in the chat, it's michigancollaborative.org is their website.
Okay.
You can reach out to them.
Okay. There was a case recently where a student faced expulsion for not keeping up with homework while in a virtual school setting. Doesn't this have the potential for double jeopardy? I guess I don't quite understand that. Not in school means that you are truant and face the youth justice system. Oh, I see what they're saying. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. Like if you were supposed to, if part of your probation was that you were supposed to be in school and COVID said you had to stay home, what kind of problems did that lead to? Or are you aware of me?
So yeah, I can add a little bit of color to that conversation. So I see the comment also talks about Senator Irwin being a big supporter. He's been a big supporter of our work for as long as he's been in office, Raise the Age, and every other campaign. But one of the challenges that probation, we've talked about probation before. We talked about it in the presentation, these are very specific conditions, and a lot of times, even as specific as the conditions can be, the application of those conditions, and if someone violates them, to what extent are they immediately held in violation of their probation? That's all very subjective at the end of the day, right? And so you're talking about the challenges that the system faced when school became virtual, right? Now there's if you're being required to log on to a Zoom call to show that you're present in class, right? But you don't have good access to Wi-Fi. You could be wanting to go to school. You could be wanting to be present, but then you're unable to do so because the library is closed and you don't have Wi-Fi or a computer at home, right? And so those are challenges that kids face. The other thing about suspensions and expulsions, right? This is, again, part of the trend of making status offenses or imposing punishments for status offenses that are greater than the actual level of the offense, right? If a kid is skipping school, is the proper, the kid is skipping school, is the proper solution to that to kick the kid out of school? Probably not. But because of the way that our probation system is set up, that is a solution that is a result, an outcome that's possible, right? And so we need to be addressing some of the ways that we set up the system, because some of the outcomes that are possible and that are likely are actually counterproductive. And it's we have to be intentional with that. Yeah.
So there's another question, and this one actually sort of occurred to me and kind of was one of those jaw-dropping things that like if you're an adult criminal, you're entitled to representation and you get a public defender. And do adult criminals have to pay for that public defender? I don't think so, do they? So why don't kids?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Mary says that, and Mary is the best presenter on the Michigan Center of Youth Justice's information that I've ever seen. One of the things that she says is that public defenders, so-called public defenders, are not so public, right? It's a public defender that was assigned to the youth, but then at the end of the day, they're on the hook for a lot of the attorney's fees, right? And the way that we set up our system, and this really goes to like why we have public defenders in the first place. The way that we set up our system in the United States, we have a legal system that addresses a lot of nuance. And so in order to navigate that nuance, you need to have a lawyer that can help guide you. Otherwise, you are more than likely to end up having an unjust outcome, right? And so a public defender will help you do that. But if you end up having to, you go through the process, a public defender helps you through that process, and then you're on the hook for, $5,000, $10,000 in attorney fees. How much did you actually benefit from that? Yeah, you didn't end up in detention, but that kid will now be on the hook for that money for a long time, right? And that creates similar long-standing challenges. So these public defenders aren't exactly public, right? There are organizations that provide indigent defense, and they do, provide resources for folks that aren't able to afford legal representation. But that NJDC report that the Michigan Supreme Court asked for, it talks about how the different ways that indigent defense can be provided to youth in our state, and other states have been able to address this issue. So we should be as well.
Another question has just popped up, but as you spoke, it occurred to me that, I've read a lot of stories about public defenders often are not really paying attention to your case. They're just trying to, so that's an issue too, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, one thing before I answer that, I do want to say, like, a lot of people that are involved in the youth legal system are involved for the right reasons, right? Like, no one becomes a public defender because it pays well. No one becomes a probation officer because it pays. A lot of these people get involved in the system because they have, they really care. They really want to do well. They want to do good for the youth in our state. But the way that the system is set up is that it creates challenges. So these public defenders have, 50 cases, right? And so it's impossible for them to provide adequate legal representation to each and every single one. And they have to make, value judgments at the end of the day. I was speaking to a public defender a couple of years ago when I was still in college to talk about his course or his caseload. And he was saying, like, I have to, look at the case on paper and make a judgment as to whether it's a good use of my time. And he's like, it's an impossible situation that I'm in. It's the catch-22. And do I put more effort into this and try for a better outcome, or do I put more effort into a more challenging case that there's more at risk, right? So the public defenders face significant amount of challenge, but I don't know that they bear all of the responsibility for that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so we have one more question. It says, of these issues that you went through, which can be addressed at the state level and which have to be changed at the local level? I think you were mostly referring to, like, a lot of state legislation that you're working on. Is that correct?
Yeah, so here is, I'm really glad whoever it is that asked this question. I'm really glad that you asked because, you know, at the start, I talked about how important it is for us to make system-wide changes, you know, statewide changes that address the entire system. Um, and you know, a lot of like detention or data collection, fines and fees, right? These are changes that we need to make at a state level. But the provision of some of these community-based solutions, the extent to which, for example, restorative justice is used as a tool to, you know, to prevent kids from being incarcerated or from experiencing more significant challenges down the road. These are things that that people in your own communities, that you and your own community can advocate for. In Washtenaw County, you guys have a great prosecutor who we've worked with him on a number of occasions, Ellie Savitt, who's also an advocate for you know, for restorative justice. Not every community has that, and there isn't a lot of you know, visibility for those off ramps and for those different programs, you know, in every community. And so that's something that I would suggest is looking into those community-based programs, you know, in the community level and finding ways to expand them. One more thing that I'll mention is LGBTQ youth. This is an important issue for me because a number of my friends in high school, you know, went through, you know, bullying and mental health challenges. And what that means is, you know, as a result of that, they're at higher risk of going through the justice, of being involved in the youth legal system. I think, and this is something that I've seen a number of communities. I was just in Traverse City at the end of August, and I was talking to some parents who are activists in their community, and they were telling me about how at one point a few years ago there was an incident of a youth who was bullied for being gay, right? And he contemplated suicide and faced a significant amount of challenges, but the community rallied around that youth and really provided, you know, opportunities for that youth to express himself and to you know, seek help and even provide help to other youth that hadn't come out or weren't facing similar challenges but could. And that's one of the things that we can do. If we can treat our youth in our communities with empathy and provide them with opportunities to be themselves and you know, avoid some of the mental health challenges that they face, just as the fact of being a youth, right? Being an awkward kid, right? If we can address some of those challenges as a community, we can prevent a lot of the problems in our justice system.
Yeah, you mentioned the dispute resolution, and we have had a speaker from the dispute resolution, Senator Brenda Doolin, and she shared the presentation with Victoria Burton Harris, the Ellie. I always want to say Ellie Savitt's assistant prosecutor. So for folks who are new to this, to our Lunch and Learn program, there are a couple of videos out there that you might want to check out on criminal justice reform. And also, I was wondering, we recently had a presentation that with Sheriff Clayton and Delphia Simpson, who's the public defender, and they were talking about the Criminal Justice Collaborative Council. Are you involved? Is MCYJ involved with that at all?
So we are really involved with a lot of different organizations that are doing work. I would say pretty much at this point, like any justice organization that is active in the state of Michigan, we've been on a coalition with, or we partnered with at some point. So I don't have specific knowledge about our involvement with them, but I would venture a guess and say, yeah, we probably have been involved with them in the past.
Yeah, I just have to say, I mean, I'm really so impressed with what the organization does. My mind is blown at how much work there really needs to be done, and which we could do at the level of youth that would prevent so many more problems as you know, as these folks grow up and get into the system. So I'm really just very grateful for the MCYJ and for the work you do.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. What I'm doing right now is I'm putting I'm putting my contact information into the chat box for everyone to be able to access.
Perfect.
And if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to me. I have MCYJ's information here as well, our website, our Twitter, our Facebook, and our Instagram. What I'll suggest is that each of you sign up for our newsletter that goes out every month. We share a lot of information about our work. On our website, you can sign up to volunteer. And we have a lot of trainings on legislative advocacy, on and a number of other things. So if that's something that you're interested in, reach out to me, find more information on our website, follow us on social media, and we can really start to change the narrative on youth justice in our state together. Thank you all so much for this opportunity.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. And it was just a very informative, great presentation. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, and to mention that we did put a lot of links in the chat. And I want to mention one specifically. There's the Marshall Project has a page on youth justice. And if you want to do a deeper dive into criminal justice reform in general and youth justice in particular, it's a great website. They have a lot of resources. Now, I would like to say we hope you will join us in October for our first presentations in the Climate Justice series. On Wednesday, October 13 at 7 o'clock, Teresa Reed will host the presentation Carbon Pricing and Alternatives with guests Mary Garton of the Ann Arbor chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby and Missy Stultz of A20. And then on Friday, October 22nd at noon, Lunch and Learn will host Charles Good, who's an MSU professor who will speak on issues regarding solar installations on agricultural land at public utility and residential scale. And you can find more information about that on our website, lwvwashtenaw.org. That's lwvwashtenaw.org for how to join. And you'll also find links to videos of this and many other presentations on topics important to every citizen. We'd like to thank current members of the League of Women Voters for your support. If you're not yet a member, consider joining the League and supporting the essential work of protecting the right of every citizen to vote. Stay safe, stay well, and stay informed and active in your government. Thank you again, Husain, and thank you, everyone.